Today we will be reading an experience, a first-hand experience of a young girl that lived through the Great Depression of 1929. Let's go ahead and start with her story. My parents migrated to New York from the Ukraine in 1916. And when I was a young girl, we lived in the slums of the Lower East Side. During the 1920s, we didn't know there was going to be a depression. We were just building ourselves up and struggling along. We lived in a poor place, but we were never desperate. My father started working in the flooring business, and as the building trade boomed, he really started making money. This allowed us to move uptown to the Bronx, which to us was like living out in the country. We had a 4-room apartment, and my parents began to furnish it with hand-carved furniture and drapes for the windows with golden tassels. My father had this feeling of wanting things to look rich, to make up for the fact that we had lived through all those terrible years. There was nothing on the floor until one day my father came home with this carpet, and he unrolled it. It was like cherry pie. It was a red oriental carpet, hand-woven, and when you walked in and saw it, you just exploded with delight. It was so beautiful. My mother, ever the one who watched the pennies, said, "How much did you pay for this carpet?" My father said, $250. My mother said, "Take it back." But he didn't. My father was doing very well, and he got this marvelous order to do the floors in a building that could be called a skyscraper in those days. He went to the bank and borrowed a huge sum of money to buy the materials. And just as the work was about to begin, the market crashed. We weren't even paying attention to the stock market, so we didn't really know what was happening at the time. But almost overnight, it was like a bomb had fallen. All of a sudden, faces were tragic, and people were walking around in the hallways of our building and in the streets with inquiring eyes saying, "Has it happened to you?" It was awful. It was like a domino effect. Everything that happened to one person gradually happened to the other people who were connected with them until everything just shut down. The people who had given my father the contract lost all their money. And since my father had borrowed all of that money, he was wiped out. Psychologically, he never recovered. People jumped off the George Washington Bridge, which had only recently been built. We heard about it. People we knew who were involved with Wall Street, people who had bought on margin, that funny word margin suddenly became a part of our vocabulary. They couldn't meet their debts. They were so disgraced that they killed themselves in order to get their families the insurance money. It was incredible and horrible what happened in those years. Respectable business people would walk around in the streets of downtown Manhattan with a tray of bright red apples, and they would ask you to buy an apple for 5 cents. And horrible as that was, it was even more horrible that we didn't even have 5 cents. For about 5 years, I had been saving money in a piggy bank, nickels, pennies, dimes. The only way you could get at that money was by breaking the bank or shaking it until the coins came out one by one. Even during those terrible days, if I ever had a penny or two, I would put it in the piggy bank, and I loved to shake it and feel the weight. But it turned out that I was the only one in the family that had any money. And one day I came home and grabbed hold of my piggy bank just to give it a shake and discovered that there was nothing in it. The bank was empty. My mother was standing in the doorway of the room looking at me, and she said, "Your father borrowed the money. He has to go out to look for work and he needed money to go downtown." So I said, "How much money was there?" She said, "About $10. $10. My father took the whole thing." But she said to me, "When your father comes home, don't say anything. It's bad for him." And he came home, and I didn't say anything, but my face was swollen with tears. And my father took me in his arms and he said, "I'm sorry. I had to have money. But it's a loan. I'll pay it back to you." He never did. But it was so embarrassing for me and so painful, even then in my childish years, to have to see my father in this terrible state. That's what was bad. It wasn't the piggy bank. It was to see this happen to the man who, in my eyes, could do no wrong. My mother went to work, and I even worked playing the piano for a dancing class on Saturday mornings for 50 cents an hour. My mother would find a few pennies, and we would go to the greengrocer and wait until he threw out the stuff that was beginning to rot. We would pick out the best rotted potato and greens and carrots that were already soft. One day, I came home from school and saw furniture on the sidewalk that looked familiar. We had been evicted. What hurt me most about it was the look of pain on my mother's and father's face. I couldn't bear to look at them, to see their disgrace. We found another place which was much smaller, but in later years, I would say to my mother or father, "What happened to that desk that we had? Where is the china closet?" And they would say, "Oh, it got lost during the eviction. Someone stole it." We kept having to move, and finally we ended up in another family's apartment. They lived in one of their rooms, and we lived in their living room, my mother, father, and I. And in that room, with all of our furniture packed into it, that carpet was still on the floor. That wonderful Chinese carpet. Well, there you have it, a first-person experience of the economic challenges that came to families during the Great Depression. And remember, too, two things stand out to me in this story, just to keep in mind, that this is 1929. So a $250 carpet, by today's standards, that would cost a significant amount. And then the $10 in her piggy bank, again, that was 1929, $10, that was a lot of money at that time or in those years. All right, well, that's where we will conclude our reading for today, and I'll see everyone in another video.